Our next topic, and Bishop actually went ahead and sort of introduced it, will be proposals for a U.S. Central Conference. I'd like to introduce you today to Reverend Maidstone Malinga, the Director of Connectional Ministries for the Baltimore, Washington Annual Conference.
To God be the glory for the things God has done. My brothers and sisters, I greet you in the blessed name of our Lord Jesus Christ. As Kay mentioned, I serve as the Director of Connectional Ministries and also the assistant to the bishop in the Baltimore, Washington Conference. But my task this morning is to be the facilitator on a conversation about the global nature of our church. Throughout today and tomorrow, you hear many proposals regarding the church structure. So in this limited time we have, we will not be able to analyze each and every proposal. But today, at this moment, we'll be talking about the proposed creation of a U.S. Central Conference. As you know, outside the U.S., there are central conferences. Is there a need for a U.S. Central Conference? There have been a number of proposals that have been put forward, but today we'll be discussing two of those proposals. And to talk about these proposals are these three very dedicated United Methodists. Allow me to introduce them. First is Tim Crouch, who is the lead lay delegate from the North Texas Conference and has been delegate or alternate delegate to General Conference since 1996. He attends the First United Methodist Church in Dayton. Tim. The next participant in our discussion is Tom Harkrider, who has been a lay delegate to General Conference from Central Texas Conference since 2004, and he attends the Abilene United Methodist Church in Fort Worth. The third panelist is Tracy Merrick, who is the chairperson of the Northeastern Jurisdictional Global Task Force for the Global Change. He's also the lay delegate to the NEJ Conference, and he has been a 5-time General Conference delegate. He's a member of the First United Methodist Church in Pittsburgh. These panelists have seen so many changes in the United Methodist Church, and I believe they are experts in what they're about to share. We'll have Tom and Tim go first, and then afterwards, Tracy will follow up, and then we'll open up the floor for discussions. Tim and Tom.
Thank you, Maidstone. My name is Tim Crouch, and we appreciate the fact that Bishop Strife really sort of started this discussion of talking about a U.S. Central Conference. You know that this has been a proposal that has been in place on a number of occasions. Bishop Strife told Tim Brewster when we had a meeting of the South Central jurisdictional delegations back in October, the first time this ever came up was in 1928. Well, it's time to get this done. And it's time to get it done for a lot of reasons. And one of those is we need a place, what we have called a place of reason, to have reasonable discussions to talk about the work of the church in the United States. We know that the church is global in its nature, and we've got to be able to focus on that. We've got central conferences all across the world, except in the United States, and so we can't deal with those issues that are unique to us. We operate in a global context at the General Conference, but we're unable to address the issues that are really, truly unique to the United Methodist Church in the United States. So why create a U.S. Central Conference? There have been multiple recommendations through the years. In 2008, it passed with all of the other worldwide nature legislation, but it was so complex that it couldn't pass the constitutional amendments at the annual conference level. We believe this proposal keeps it simple, keeps it focused, and would pass at the annual conference level. It creates a space for addressing U.S. issues. There is no additional bureaucracy added to this legislation. It will give the opportunity to reduce time at General Conference, and it does allow for more time of holy conferencing at the General Conference. And I'm not sure what I just did. Help. So the question is, why should we be doing this now? Because it is an opportunity for us to address the issues in the United States. The bishop mentioned pensions, questions around ordination, vital congregations, questions around guaranteed appointments in the United States, and many more. And so this is that opportunity for us to find a place to talk about the work of the church in the United States, and that when we do that, we will be more effective in our mission and ministry because it will be closer to the mission field. And I'm going to let Tom kind of take it from there.
Thank you, Tim. Why this version, then, of a central conference? And I've done it too, so it's not just you, Tim. So why this version of a central conference? Well, it's simple, as Tim explained. It's simple and the least controversial way that we could try to put this forward. There are no additional layers of bureaucracy, as Tim mentioned, and there's no changes to the existing central conferences. They will continue to operate exactly as they have in the past. And it puts some of the decisions closer to the mission field. As we look at the actual legislation, I did it again. Look at the actual legislation. The intent of this legislation was to find the simplest, least controversial way to move us forward. And while it does require constitutional changes, which means it will need to pass by 2/3 vote at General Conference, and then also be ratified in the annual conferences, the actual legislation is really pretty simple. The changes in paragraph 10 and paragraph 28 just remove language limiting central conferences being defined as being outside the U.S. Yeah, I'm going to let you guys do it. So, and it also cleans up some language that's historic language that's been there from the days of the Uniting Conference. Looking at paragraph 30, the change there is just provides flexibility for the time that central conferences can meet, as well as removing unnecessary historic language related to the unifying conference. I'm going to try this one more time. And I'll let y'all work on it. And then we're not going to get there. The addition in paragraph 31 clarifies that the paragraph is just specific, that paragraph will just be specific to central conferences outside the U.S. And then after paragraph 31, there will be an addition of a new paragraph that specifies the U.S. Central Conference. There's a clarifying phrase that's added to section 3 in paragraph 540 that will indicate that section 3 will be specific to those central conferences outside the U.S., just to clarify that section just pertains there. And then a new section will be added following paragraph 567, creating a new U.S. Central Conference. Then the final addition just sets up a temporary interim committee on organization, or an ICO, that will just be charged with addressing the logistics of the first U.S. Central Conference meeting, and just defines that the delegates to the U.S. Central Conference will be the same delegates who are elected to General Conference. The focus of this proposal is that General Conference might become a place of reason, a place where we share what God is uniquely doing across our vast denomination in a variety of mission fields and cultural settings, and focus on our unified purpose and mission. I think you can see that it's not about creating a place to deal with current social issues, as some might suppose. We have a saying in my parts that What gets you into real trouble is not what you don't know, it's what you know that ain't so. And as General Conference continues to develop the Global Book of Discipline, General Conference will be the one deciding those things essential and what and where items will be addressed, whether that's at General Conference, at the Central Conference, or the Annual Conference level. For too long, we've allowed a dualistic mindset to dictate our actions at General Conference. Our hope is that as a worldwide church, moving to a more integral mindset that will move us to a truer expression of holy conferencing at General Conference. The perception is that I think that our past mindset has led us to arrive at General Conference with swords drawn, ready to fight it out to see which side wins. And this proposal takes us a step closer to making General Conference a place of reason. It's time to beat our swords into plowshares. So let's plow some new ground together. Amen?
We'll now hear from Tracy Merrick, who will talk about the NEJ proposal.
Thank you. We really appreciate the opportunity to share with this group some of the work we've been doing regarding a global connection plan. By way of background, at the 2012 Northeast Jurisdictional Conference, that body decided to form a task force that generated this particular proposal. In so doing, we spent some time collaborating with various groups across the denomination. We had conversations with some jurisdictional groups, as well as conversations with some members and the chair of the Standing Committee on Central Conference Matters. One of the first things we undertook was to establish some guiding principles that we thought were important for any proposal that dealt with the topics we were addressing. It needs to be Christ-focused, to extend community, and to provide greater global equality, greater access to services and participation in structures, and to have more opportunities to shape the future of the United Methodist Church. People have asked, well, what are the problems you're trying to solve? We feel that U.S. matters dominate the United Methodist Church and the General Conference agenda. We feel that the United Methodist Church and the General Conference do not focus enough on issues related to the global church. We think that there are inequalities and inequities between the jurisdictions and the central conferences, and there are opportunities to help set the agenda of the denomination. So from a high level, what are we talking about? Our proposal calls for the formation of a global connectional conference and a global connectional church. We are calling in the proposal for United Methodist connections in each one of the continents, regions within those continents, and annual conferences. Our aspiration is that this proposal will empower the global connection to thrive at being the global church, and empower the connections in regions and annual conferences to thrive at being United Methodists within their contexts. So let's take a couple of minutes and look at what each one of these components entails. The global connection has lots of responsibilities in our proposal. I will just highlight a few. It would continue to have responsibility for the Constitution of the United Methodist Church, the new Global Book of Discipline, the new Global Social Principles, a global connectional budget, and would undertake the global responsibilities that the General Conference currently handles. It would ensure a discussion of global issues. The responsibilities go on, and you can see from these slides that there are many. I would like to talk next about the Global Connectional Conference. It would replace the General Conference. It would focus on matters related to the global church only. This would enable it to be a shorter General Conference than we currently experience, less than its 2 weeks, quadrennially. It would be constituted the same way the General Conference is constituted today, and its membership would be virtually identical. In terms of the global connectional organizations, we're calling for the continuation of a Council of Bishops, a global judicial council, and the global agencies as they exist today. The one change of significance in these is that the Judicial Council would have the option to review all decisions by connectional judicial committees and regional committees on appeals. It would also have the ability to review matters that reference both the Global Book of Discipline and the connectional books of discipline. Let's talk now about the connections, that second layer that I talked about. There would be a United Methodist connection in Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America. These connections would focus on the mission from the perspectives of the regions within the connection, taking into account contextual implications of nations, cultures, languages, and legal matters. The responsibilities are many. We are talking about a connectional book of discipline for each one of the connections. It would deal with that adaptable part of the book of discipline that Bishop Strife addressed. It would deal with the number and boundaries of regions, episcopal matters, clergy standards, and so forth. If a connection would choose not to have regions, the connection itself would take the responsibilities of the regions. Let me just focus on the connectional books of discipline for just a second. In our proposal, there would continue to be the concept of a global book of discipline that would be the purview of the Global Connectional Conference. Each connection could modify the other sections of the Book of Discipline to make sure that legal and contextual matters are taken into account. A connection could decide that it would include in its connectional Book of Discipline provisions that would be unique by region, should that be appropriate. The membership to the connectional conferences would be the members of the Global Connectional Conference as long as that number met 100. If additional members would be needed, they would draw on members elected to the regional conferences. At the connectional level, we're anticipating that there would be some entities, such as a college of bishops, a judicial committee, and some connection-specific agencies. So what are the benefits of this particular approach? We feel that it somewhat levels the playing field and brings together the church outside the United States to the Global Connectional Conference and the global connection in an improved way. It gives greater attention to the context of ministry and helps strengthen the ministries that are needed in the local context, especially outside the United States. It will offload the heavy volume of US-specific legislation that is dealt with at the current General Conference, and it would become the responsibility of the Connectional Conference in North America. Let's focus on regions for a couple of seconds. The regional conferences would be the successors to the jurisdictional conferences and the central conferences. Regions would be established geographically. All regions would have the same authority and the same responsibilities. There would be 3 regions in Africa, 1 in Asia, 3 in Europe, and 5 in North America. The region responsibilities would be similar to what jurisdictions currently perform. The regional conferences would continue to meet within a year after the Global Connectional Conference meets. And at the regional level, we would anticipate certain organizations, a college of bishops, a regional committee on episcopacy, a committee on appeals, and so forth. We feel it's very important for the regions to be a new entity that would replace the jurisdictions and the central conferences and their differences. We believe that this will help strengthen ministries within the context of the region, and it also removes the offensive term central from our lexicon. Annual conferences. The number, role, and purposes of annual conferences would remain as they are today, basically. Should the Global Connectional Conference or a Connectional Conference decide to change that, they would have that option, but we do not include any changes in our proposal. So what's our approach? And I will close with this. Our approach is that we are proposing to the General Conference a concept proposal, which is found on page 467 of the ADCA. There are some other pieces of legislation that accompany this. They are listed on a sheet of paper that's back on the table in the back, indicating which legislative committee they're assigned to, the title, and so forth. If adapted, are adopted, the concept proposal would then be referred to a task force established by the connectional table to write the specific legislation to come to the 2020 General Conference for its work. We are beginning to think that there are a lot of changes that are coming together in 2020, and we're excited that this particular concept can be part of that, and that as a whole, across the whole denomination, we will be able to come up with some structural changes and conceptual changes that will be better for the long-range ministry and mission of the United Methodist Church. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I open up the floor for questions, I have a couple questions for the panelists. First, could the two sides, the two presentations we have heard here, could you contrast the differences between your proposals and why, and if there's a possibility of you working together?
Well, I think that the first part of that is that in terms of our proposal, it's intended to get at what needs to be done right away. That the adoption of a U.S. Central Conference and the approval in the 2017 annual conferences of the constitutional amendments means that the U.S. Central Conference could begin meeting in 2020, as opposed to 2024 before we would really get at the mission and ministry of the work of the church. Ours is intentionally a simplified proposal. It is intended to complement the work of the connectional table, those things that have been coming forward, coming out of central conferences, to simply put that in place in advance. It can complement what's coming out of the NEJ proposal, but it means we can start working on these issues that are particular to the United States in 2020, as opposed to having to wait until 2024.
In terms of working together, absolutely. I think, though, that the difference between our proposal and the one that we've just heard Tim speak about, we believe that it's important to have equivalent structures across the church. Now, you're talking about a central conference in the United States, but the central conferences outside the U.S. would still continue to operate as they are. It seems that there's an inequity about that to us, that the huge body of 8 million United Methodists are represented by a U.S. Central Conference, and would be represented, the 3 to 4 million outside the United States would be represented by a number of, if you will, smaller central conferences, and that we're hearing from some folks outside the U.S. that they feel they ought to have a place where they can talk about issues on a continental basis, just as we would in the United States.
Thank you. In the proposal from Central Texas and North Texas, could you clarify the role of General Conference in that proposal?
The hope is that General Conference truly becomes a place where holy conferencing can occur. The proposal that we have would assume that the U.S. Central Conference would meet immediately following General Conference. So in the long term, there could be some opportunities for cost savings or cost neutral. It would also allow for the same delegates who are at General Conference to be a part of that Central Conference. And so there's some efficiencies that would occur there. And so it takes all of those U.S.-centric things that we deal with at General Conference, pulls those into that U.S. Central Conference to be dealt with in the week following General Conference. And that frees the General Conference up to really be a different type of place. And so that's the whole intent behind that.
And finally, for the NEJ proposal, there's a proposal for the global connection in Asia, Europe, North America, Africa, but none for South America or Latin America. Could you explain why?
Yes. As you probably know, the Methodist churches that are in Latin America and South America are not United Methodist at the moment. And so the thought was, if there should be United Methodist churches in Latin America, that we could very easily add a connection for that continental area as well.
Thank you very much. We have about 10 minutes for question and answers. So I wanted to find out if there are people. If you have a question, could you come to the microphone, identify yourself and the question, and please state whether you're asking either of them or both of the presenters.
Hello, my name's Lee Ann Nakanishi with the California Pacific Conference. And my question is, what are the financial implications between both proposals? It seems like the Northeastern jurisdiction calls for an additional conference, and I was curious about that.
Would you like me to go first? We have discussed this in our connectional, in the context of the connectional conference. Yes, you're right. It is an additional level. There are some additional meetings and entities involved. We believe that some of the costs of the connectional conferences would be absorbed by a reduced length of general conference and the cost for it. But there's still an incremental amount. Basically, we're believing that the cost could be anywhere from $300,000 to $1 million a quadrennium. The actual number will depend largely on what General Conference does when it adapts the concept proposal. And we're going to ask GCFA to do an analysis once General Conference has taken its action regarding the concept proposal. But we're thinking it's somewhere between those two figures.
We have asked the GCFA. The petition came from one of the members of our delegations, Tim Brewster, in part because we don't have the ability to estimate those costs, and we've asked GCFA, because it's coming from an individual, to give us some cost estimate on that. Our hope would be that by reducing the length of the general conference, that we're going to have a substantial savings that translates across into the U.S. Central Conference meeting.
Thank you. Next question.
Lonnie Brooks, Lay Leader, Alaska. One of the fears that I've heard expressed in conversations I've had about the proposal to create a U.S. Central Conference is that it's an attempt subtly to take the budgeting authority away from the General Conference and concentrate more of the general church expenditures in the United States. How would you respond to that? And that would be a question directed to all of you.
In our proposal, Lonnie, the decisions regarding the adoption of a global budget would still be the purview of the Global Connectional Conference. That does not mean that there wouldn't be budgets established by the connections as well, but if we're thinking about dealing with ministry on a global level, we believe that the Global Connectional Conference needs to have that authority.
You know, it still is the authority of the General Conference to establish the budget and make those determinations. My own personal view is we have to be very concerned as the church about how we manage the budget going forward. How do we address those kinds of questions as the church in this country continues to decline and the church around the world continues to grow? We've got to be very cognizant of the budget issues that are facing us. But it is the authority of the General Conference to determine how the budget is going to be dealt with.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't see anybody going to a microphone. Oh, there.
Wee Chang from New England. I have a question in the context of what happened at Anglican Union. If we go to the U.S. conference or connections or regions, what would be the, how do I say, the accountability relationship among those? Right now, if we say who speaks for the church, we can say General Conference. If the same question is posed after this change, what would be answer to that?
Yeah, in our proposal, I mean, obviously, General Conference still has the ultimate authority, and the work that's already being done with Standing Committee on Central Conference Matters, Connectional Table, the work that they're already doing, as to what that book of discipline will look like. Bishop Strife, I think, outlined that beautifully for us. And where we draw that line as to who has the responsibility for that. Ultimately, General Conference is going to have that responsibility. And how they choose to delegate that is how close to the mission field that will move, whether that's at a central conference or a jurisdictional or an annual conference level. That rests still with General Conference, and General Conference always has the authority to pull responsibilities back to itself.
Our proposal is basically the same. The Global Connectional Conference would be the only body that could speak for the entire denomination.
Thank you. As you can tell, this is a very critical registration that's been proposed before General Conference. As we wind down, I will ask the presenters to speak for just a minute. Why now? Why the urgency to consider this proposal in the midst of all the issues that we're having? So if you can speak for only 1 minute on the question of why now?
Go ahead, Tracy.
Why now? We believe that the time has come, given the changing demographics across the denomination. As most of us know, the church outside the United States, most notably in Africa, is growing substantially. And we believe that the time is coming when the majority of delegates will actually come from outside the United States, and that our proposal is a part of the process of making sure that the church outside the United States is equally represented, an equal participant in shaping what our church looks like.
Since the early 90s, all the study committees that we've had from General Conference have come back with that same recommendation of a U.S. Central Conference or something similar. And we've made attempts to do that. And that's the one piece, though, that seems to transcend in all of those studies that needs to occur. Why now? For our proposal, with the simplicity of it, if General Conference is not ready to embrace a broader program, a plan, this will allow this piece to go in that we've talked about for a long time. It affirms the direction that we have been moving for a number of years as a General Conference. It embraces the work that Connectional Table and the Committee on Central Conference Matters, the good work that they're doing, and just allows us to move forward and taking another step forward as we live into a new reality of what General Conference can look like.
And I think what I would add to that is the sense of urgency is in the fact that the church in the United States is in decline. We all know that. Do we want to wait till 2024 to begin to address that as the United States, or do we want to move that forward so that we can begin to seriously work on it closer to the mission field, to be talking about how are we going to regain some of the vitality that we have lost, and that we can grow the church once again. We can make more disciples of Jesus Christ for transforming the world.
Thank you very much. Let's show some love for Tom, Tim, and Tracy. And to you, my friends, I want to say thank you for listening and for paying attention to this important proposal. Thank you, and God bless.